Welcome to Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates. In today's class, we will be learning about clauses. We would learn what they are. We would learn how to identify the different types of clauses in sentence structures as well. And at the end of this class, you should be able to attempt several questions on grammatical names and functions especially. Let's go on.
Eko Learners Support, a support program of the Lagos State Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education for WAEC and NECO candidates.
A clause is the basic unit of grammar. On the grammatical hierarchy, the clause is the fourth, with the morpheme being the first, the word being the second, the phrase being the third, the clause is the fourth, and then we have the sentence. So just above the phrase is the clause. Of course, one or more phrases can make a clause. It can be described as a group of words that contain a subject and a verb. The sentence may or may not have a finite verb and may or may not make sense. Remember, we're looking at clauses. In essence, a clause can have a finite or non-finite verb, which means it may make sense in the case of a finite verb and it may not make sense in the case of a non-finite verb. Finiteness in sentence structures or in clauses is determined by the form of verb, whether it is finite or non-finite. So when we talk about finiteness, it focuses on whether the verb in a structure is finite or whether it is non-finite. So again, you should be able to explain what clauses are, identify the different types of clauses present in a sentence, and respond to questions to show your understanding. Finiteness. The form of verb used in a sentence can be what? Finite or non-finite. Finite verb is a form of verb that, number one, shows agreement with a subject and is marked for tense. When the verb in a sentence cannot change, to probably future, past, or with whatever type of tense, then that particular verb is most likely a non-finite verb. If that verb cannot agree with the subject of the sentence, then it is a non-finite verb. Simply put, how do we test for finiteness? Once it agrees with the subject and once it also can be marked for tense, then the verb is finite. If it cannot, it's a non-finite verb. Non-finite verbs are not marked for tense and do not show agreement with a subject. Examples are pillars for explanations. Let's look at the following examples. He visited Bola having finished his assignment. He visited Bola having finished his assignment. Look at example number 2. He went to the market when he finished his assignment. He went to the market when he finished his assignment. In example 1, having, which we have here, is an example of a non-finite verb. Also, the first part of the sentences can stand on their own. I can just say he visited Bola and say he went to the market. The first part of the sentences can stand on their own. We can see them here. So we call them what? Main or independent clauses. The other italicized part of the sentence, which is having finished his assignment and when he finished his assignment, are what? Subordinate or dependent clauses. Please take note of the name because we will be using main and independent at intervals, and of course subordinate and dependent. They mean one and the same thing. It is called dependent because it leans on another for its complete meaning. I would not just see you and say, having finished his assignment. The next thing you would ask is, what happened after that? Or I say, when he finished his assignment. Your next question is, what happened when he finished his assignment? Okay, so subordinate clauses or dependent clauses cannot make full meaning on their own. They need to depend on the main clause or the independent clause to make a complete thought. Let's look at the first type of clause, the independent clause. This is also known as the main clause. It is independent, just like the name implies. It doesn't need anything to stand on its own. You know, it goes on its own, it makes complete sense, and it is even equivalent to a simple sentence. Okay, let's focus on clauses for now. This is also known as the main clause. This type of clause can make sense on its own. Structurally, this sentence type is equivalent to a simple sentence. We have examples here. The children are visiting the museum today. Sam gave his notebook to his friend. We will come tomorrow. All of these are independent clauses and, of course, simple sentences. We have the subject and we have the predicate in each of these sentences. The second type of clause, which is the dependent clause or the subordinate clause. Okay? It begins with a subordinator or a subordinating conjunction. Take a look at that. We're going to be looking at some examples of subordinating conjunction. And does not make sense on its own, but depends on another clause to express a complete thought. Hence, for a clause to be categorized as dependent clause, okay, this should be as, it must have either a non-finite verb or a subordinating conjunction. For it to be a dependent clause, it is either introduced by a subordinating conjunction or by a non-finite verb. Remember, we said that non-finite verbs, okay, cannot agree with the subject, and also they cannot be marked for tense. When those two things happen to a verb, then it is not a finite verb. Look at the examples of dependent clauses. Walking along the road. You may say, oh, walking is a verb. It's a verb. So why is it not a finite verb? Just hold on, we're going to use those in structures. As soon as the teacher arrives, what happened? When I heard the news while we were watching TV, did you know that if we add these sentences or these clause structures into another sentence, it would make full meaning? So I can say that I met the old woman walking along the road, or walking along the road, I met the old woman. When I heard the news, I jumped up for joy. I jumped up for joy when I heard the news. Okay, so when I heard the news, of course, would not stand alone. But I added an independent clause. I jumped up for joy. And I jumped up for joy can stand on its own and make complete sense. Note, take note of this. All non-finite clauses are dependent clauses. When it's a non-finite verb that introduces the clause, it is a dependent clause. A finite clause that has a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of it becomes a dependent clause. How? You have something like, as soon as she arrives. She arrives is an independent clause. And then I add as soon as, which is a subordinating conjunction to its beginning. What happens? It becomes what? A dependent clause. So when a subordinating conjunction introduces a clause, that clause becomes what? A dependent clause. Okay? Examples of subordinating conjunctions include when, where, whom, which, how, okay, and all the others here. Let's look at more examples. While sitting at the window, I watched the children play. While sitting at the window, I watched the children play. Walking down the street, she witnessed the head-on collision. Look at these sentences. The teachers dispersed as soon as the school principal finished her speech. All of these are complete sentences, of course. They make full meaning, but there are two parts to each of these sentences. In sentences 1, 2, and 3, there are two clauses as we have seen. Main clause and subordinate clause. The underlined in each of these cases are the subordinate clauses. Let's underline the subordinate clauses. Remember, subordinate clauses are introduced by subordinating conjunctions. While is a subordinating conjunction, so we have while sitting at the window. And then our main clause is what? I watched the children play. Walking down the street, she witnessed the head-on collision. Walking down the street is our subordinating, walking is our non-finite verb. Remember, I said that non-finite verb can introduce a subordinate clause. So this is an example. Okay, walking down the street, our subordinate clause or our dependent clause. Subordinate and dependent mean the same. She witnessed the head-on collision. Okay. Walking down the street, she witnessed the head-on collision. That is our main clause, and it can make complete sense on its own, with or without the subordinate clause. The teachers dispersed as soon as the school principal finished her speech. The teachers dispersed. Beautiful sentence. Complete expression. As soon as the school principal finished her speech is our subordinate clause or dependent clause. The main clause is, okay, the teacher dispersed. Just as we have explained here. So number one, the underlined in each case are subordinate clause and they are introduced by a subordinating conjunction as seen in 1 and 2. 1 and 3, okay? Subordinating conjunction, subordinating conjunction. And then what do we have here is a non-finite verb. Okay? Let's move on. Here are some practice questions. Circle the main and underline the subordinate clauses. So you have to circle the main clause and underline the subordinate clauses in the sentence. And then you're doing one more thing, because I really need to understand if you know and understand what we have been doing. So you're going to go ahead to explain what makes the subordinate clause a subordinate clause. What makes it a subordinate clause? So after you have circled your main clause and you have underlined your subordinate clause, look at your subordinate clause and go ahead to explain What makes it a subordinate clause? Now let's do this. He usually buys food whether he is hungry or not. He usually buys food whether he is hungry or not. Where's our main clause? Instruction says circle the main clause. He usually buys food. Underline the subordinate clause, okay? Whether he is hungry or not. One more thing, the instruction says, why is it what? A subordinate clause. Whether he is hungry or not. Why is it a subordinate clause? It is a subordinate clause because it is introduced by the subordinating conjunction whether. Okay? This is our subordinating conjunction. This is our subordinating conjunction. And that subordinating conjunction introduces the subordinate clause. Let's move on. Unless you release the suspect, the protesters will not rest. Can you identify this here? Very simple. This is our subordinate clause, subordinating conjunction, which tells us that this is our subordinate clause. The protesters will not rest is our main clause. This is our main clause. Remember, you have to circle the main clause and underline the subordinating conjunction, subordinate clause. This is our subordinate clause. Here is our subordinating conjunction unless. Signing the papers, he remembered how much time he had wasted. Signing the papers, he remembered how much time he had wasted. Main clause, he remembered how much time he had wasted. Remember, we have to circle this. He remembered how much time he had wasted. Signing the papers is our subordinate clause. And this subordinate clause is introduced by what? A non-finite verb. Okay? And then the last one. She talks to the little girl as though she were an adult. She talks to the little girl as though she were an adult. What's the main clause? She talks to the little girl. Subordinate clause or dependent clause because it can't stand on its own, as though she were an adult. What's our subordinating conjunction? As though. I hope you understand this. Do more practice exercises. It's not so difficult. If you can deduce all of this, then you will find questions on grammatical names and functions in comprehension quite easy. All right. For questions, feedback, and comments, visit the social media handles displayed on the screen. Keep practicing. Thank you.
Acing your WAEC and NECO examinations has been made easy by the Lagos State Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education with the Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO Candidates television program. Join seasoned teachers as they take you through these core subjects: mathematics, English language, physics, chemistry, and biology, targeting the exact syllabus of WAEC and NECO. Watch Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates on this station. Learners can also connect with Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates through these social media platforms to access more educational content and give their feedback. Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates. Pass your examinations with flying colors.